Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Diaspora Dialogue series with LA. I am Lillian Agwebe, your host on this program. We are having these conversations because we are trying to change the narrative that all diasporans are the same. We do not come to the diaspora the same way. We are doing different things in the diaspora. And thankful for all the blessings of the diaspora, we still miss the homeland. So, what do we miss about the homeland? And how are we faring in the diaspora? And so, I'm talking to different members of the diaspora. Today, I have another phenomenal guest. And yes, that word again, phenomenal, because all my guests are phenomenal. Engineer Tinah Ibironke is joining me from Maryland. And if you say Maryland again, that's because you haven't done what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to email me and tell me you want to share your diaspora story. I live in Maryland. Until I hear from all of you, my guests are going to continue to come from Maryland. Well, maybe not so, but I just thought I should encourage you to let me know if you want to be on the program. Engineer Tinah Ibironke, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It's actually a pleasure to be here to have this conversation with you.
Awesome. So I imagine that at one point in time you were a teeny little bit young lady and you had your whole life ahead of you. Where were you at that time? And when you were thinking about your future, what were the things that you were thinking about?
Thanks for that great question. Yeah, that's maybe let's say a few years ago because I'm not that old. Just wanted to put that out there. But when I was younger, just the way you put it, I was in Nigeria. Of course, I spent at least 2 decades of my life plus a bit in Nigeria. And thinking about future, it's very interesting when you look back and start to just think about the things that's happened in the past. I never thought that I would actually be here in the diaspora and to be where I am right now. Back then, there was a few things I believe you can also relate to this that were actually very important. Education and the fact that you had to be something, you had to become something. That's from my father's perspective. As a female child back home, like I said, I'm not too old, but back then it's very important for you to have an education, especially when you're a female and within probably male that are just doing, they believe to do better than the female people, or at least with the female children. So thinking about future, one thing I wanted to do was just to get a good education. I wanted to get out of home. I wanted to be an engineer like my dad because it was an engineer I had. And back then, you can consider him as not at least a little bit in the upper level when it comes to people that in education and a bit of at least it was comfortable. So that would definitely was the goal for me.
Great to hear that. So, yes, the female child, let's do good. Let's go to school. Let's get an education. Let's become an engineer. And you were growing up in Nigeria, following up in your father's footsteps, as it were. So, where did the transition happen? Did your father come to the US? Did you follow your father to the US? How did you go from following your dad's footsteps in Nigeria to becoming a diaspora?
Well, that's actually it's pretty good as well in terms of probably giving you a bit background about myself. So back then in college, I did, of course, met quite a number of people. Of course, you never know what's going to happen, and I'm just going to keep this really, really short and concise. So we were in the same church. It was a family that were attending the same church at the time together. But that family, they ended up traveling out of the country and we didn't really hear about from them. And parents are the ones that probably keep in touch. If they ever do, we didn't have cell phones or anything at the time. So I was so happy to get out of the house because I just wanted to be independent. I wanted to be out of the house. And then French nurse reached out to me and said, "Oh yeah, this person is back and blah blah blah. He wants to meet you." I'm like, "Oh, there you go." And unfortunately, at the time, it was during the break, so I had to go back home. That didn't quite happen because my parents they're not, you're not going to be in college and want to stand for some boyfriend coming home. But the good part of that was the parents kind of came, nothing, they didn't, there was nothing intentional about what they were trying to do, but And along the line, I was actually able to see like now, then my friend or boyfriend, but they were family friends. So fast forward a bit, we reconnected, and that was it. We reconnected, and after a few years, when he went through the process of course, formally introducing, I guess, what he had in mind to my parents, and the parents met, and then he tried to put the visa together and all of that for me to actually come over. So yes, I came on, I came on a visitor, a fiancé visitor, to actually meet him here because he was already living here in the United States.
Power of the male gender, or should I say the power of love, you know? So, hey, love brought you to the US. But when you were growing up, though, you hadn't thought about living in the US. But you must have had images about the US. So when you came, were there any surprises? Did you like, I don't know about this. So how did that work out for you?
All right, so Dr. Lillian, I forgot to mention something. At the time, before I actually came over, I had been here on visit. And that was because my parents had sent my older siblings to school here in the States. So I had about three or four of them that were already on ground. Now, my parents, and just to not to see anything bad about them, they did not like the idea of children or his children, and then my dad, because men make the decision at home at the time. He didn't like the idea of his children just staying. I mean, they went there, they came here for education, and they ended up just wanted to stay. So he thought if he keeps sending them overseas, everybody's gonna be done. And he had a huge business. Like I said, he was comfortable. He had large businesses all over. He was doing businesses not only in Nigeria, over the world. So he was thinking, oh, okay, this is not going right. Like three, four people had already decided to stay, and just because they were there, so it was very, very reluctant. So yes, I did. So at the time, he had told us that you all have to finish your education. When you get married, you can go ahead and do whatever you want, but you're not going to allow you to go overseas and get your studies and then decide to say no. Home is home, and all those things that your parents
I,
kind of tell you.
Yeah, I think we should have a meeting about what to do with the older siblings who got us to who speaks, because the exact same thing happened in our household. My older siblings had gone to school abroad and they weren't coming back home. And so when I was finishing high school and I was saying, okay, so where am I going to? My mother said, you're not going anywhere. I'm like, excuse me? She's like, look, go to school in Nigeria. You're going to go on vacation every summer, but no, you're not going to go. I'm not going to risk you going to. I'm like, how come they get to go and stay and I don't get to go and stay? But that's a very interesting that it happened in other places as well. I didn't even know that.
And it was big on his mind because he just wanted people to take over. I mean, his children, he wanted to have a legacy where the children are around, they can govern his business, watch what he's doing, and be part of what the big things he did and accomplished. And growing, having just this a background of nothing, his parents weren't educated. He believed he's worked hard, and he didn't want that to go to someone else, just to let it go. So yes, he was very adamant about us not the younger siblings staying
But there's a difference between visiting and when you come to stay. I also visited the US a couple of times before I came to stay, and I don't know what I was thinking when I was visiting. But when I finally came to stay, it was as if the scales fell from my eyes, because I think the Americans had always been Americans all of this time. But I remember when I came and I was in grad school in New York, I was saying, and I got on the subway, and these young children were like making all this racket on the subway. And I was waiting for somebody to put them in their place. Because growing up in Nigeria, you just didn't behave anyhow, especially when there were elders around, you know. And I was like, oh, somebody's going to put them in their place in a minute or two. Nothing happened. The entire ride, nothing happened. So I was just like, oh my goodness,
My
is
God.
this for real? So I'm wondering, did you have some things that you already used to and some things that were new that was like, what's going on here?
Absolutely. A lot of those did happen. Of course, when I arrived, and just to continue the story, in my mind, everything just was, you could get everything on the platter of gold. You didn't have to do much. You know how your siblings, they come home and they have all those things, so nice things for you. And you're like, oh my goodness. So you just go there and grab. That's how it is when you go. But yes, the very first shocker, and I'll tell you another story which was actually about cultural and change and all that. But initially was the fact that, oh yes, you really need to come and work hard for the money. Nothing comes for free. So that was a very first reality. I mean, for me, it was a reality check. It was, oh, okay, snow, rain, you have to be out there. Nothing is gonna stop you from going out there and being able to pay. You have to pay bills and things like that. And of course, a lot of other things that I could just, it was just one thing after the other. You're paying bills, and then you have you have traffic that when you have ticket from police on the road, and all those things I've never really seen or heard before. But one particular story, when I started working as an intern, I was actually in college at the time with this particular company. We had a meeting, I believe it was the very first meeting after I resumed work at that particular organization. And so we were meeting in a very small room. I believe it was the manager's office. It was just a quick morning meeting that would be. So we had a few chairs, and the manager and supervisor and intern and everyone was actually in there to have this quick meeting. And then the director came in a bit late. Well, I'm not sure if he was really supposed to be part of the meeting, but he came in late. So after we had started meeting, the chairs, everybody was sitting and all that, there was no extra chair. So he walked in and stood by the door and was looking, and I stood up from my chair and just and I I kid you not, that experience has never led my mind. And he said, "Why did you stand up?" I'm like, "Oh, so you can sit down." You, you know how the elderly, when they walk into the room, you dare not just
Or
sit
the
there.
Oga, right?
Oh, I don't know, girl, guy, no, at work. And he's like, no, sit down. I'm good. You can't be standing up with me. And then after all said and done, he called to me like, oh my God, I love your culture. So you stood up for me so I can sit down. It was just so, it was interesting. I mean, I don't know exactly how to place it, but I just believe it was one of those things that you grew up with, that you learn. It's culture, it's tradition, but it's not bad, because then it actually shows the respect, and explained to me exactly what it meant. It was just an interesting thing I wanted to mention.
And so absolutely, you know, when I was working in Staten Island, I was coordinating and I was having an event, and I had flyers that I wanted to give to people. And I was living on Staten Island. We have the ferry, which has huge traffic during rush hour. So I'd asked for volunteers to come and help me leaflet at the ferry. And I was standing at the ferry with my leaflet, and I saw my executive director. She was going into the city, but she had come like 20 minutes before her. She was going to get on the ferry so that she could come and help me leaflet at the ferry. I'm looking at her like, madam, you know, that sort of thing. But it was like, no, we need people to come. I'm already coming to the ferry. I'm already a hand, so I just come early. And it's just like, yeah, people don't think anything about what needs to be, you know, to like, oh, you need somebody to go to the store for you. I'm going to go to the store for you. They actually, you don't even have to ask them. They volunteer to do all of these things that you ordinarily wouldn't even dream about asking them.
That's I know. It's interesting. Like I said, for me, that's one of the things that's a shock here. And of course, you get to work, and of course, that part of that what you just mentioned is right. Like it's the fact that the interns, which were at the time, of course, a couple of us, some of them were, I was actually, because I'd already been in college in Nigeria anyway. So at least those, I was in my 20s, and the other ones that are probably their teenage years, like 18, 19. Oh yeah, Joe, talking to the director. So what did you say was supposed to do? Joe, I have the record. I'm like, oh my gosh, did you just call? Did you just call the director? Like you referred to him by his first name?
Yep,
Really? I mean,
yep.
those things are just, it's interesting.
Absolutely. Those are the interesting things and differences about our culture. But when you look back and say, okay, fine, you came to join your husband, has there ever been a time where you said, should have come back to Nigeria. We should have moved back to Nigeria. Or were you like, yep, this was it. This was a good idea. This is what we did.
I would say probably, I guess, different times in my life there are been different feelings. And I would say probably initially, because it's not that my family is like, I'm not like, oh yeah, I'm a president's child or whatever, but back home, we had, you know how you have people that help with everything. They wash your clothes for you. And you have people that drive you to school, take you everywhere you want to go, cook for you and all of that. When I got here, then I realized that and I'm not gonna lie to you, initially I didn't even know how to make much food in the kitchen because I never had to do it. So yes, I've got
Switch on the kettle, and that's about it.
about it right. So initially, I will not lie to you, I was a lot going on, going to school and having to work and all those other things I've never done in my life, meaning that I've never had to combine all those things. I'm like, you know what? I don't think. And then my mother-in-law was working 3 jobs at a time. And I'm like, I told my husband, if this is where life is going to be, I want to go back home because I've never known life to be like this. Why? Like, why? Why do I have to die? I get my life together. So yes, absolutely. But I thank God for my husband because even though he was doing his own thing, had to struggle and all of that as well, he was actually able to support. So when I had my first child and my mother-in-law as well, I got the support. Yes, it was overwhelming. Yes, it was a lot of work. But then I guess the joy of now having a family now made a difference between, oh, do I really want to like go back and stay home while my husband is here? Because obviously you're not going to uproot him from, and that's going to be the case. I would have to go home and stay home and would have to do the shuttling it back and forth and back and forth. So the joy of actually staying and being around was actually the fact that when I actually became a mom, now that was actually a different phase in my life when I thought, it's actually better for me to stay here and have my family and stay with my husband instead of having to do back and forth, back and forth. So yeah, couple of times in my
That
life where I
makes
had to.
so much sense. I know you're very right. I say about when my daughter was born and I had to go back to work like about when she was 6 weeks old. I'm just like, what in the world is this? Why am I going to work about 6 weeks? But what we said, build. So you have to think about going back to work. And then, so not only did I have to go back to work, I was now also the cook. I was the driver. I was the nanny. I was like, oh no. But
Everything.
hey, there's some things that make it those sort of quote unquote sacrifices seem worthwhile. What are some of the things that you can say, you can point to that makes all of those sacrifices worthwhile for you to be in the US?
Without a doubt, I guess I'm going to talk from a perspective of one, I guess a mom, and two, I'm also going to say probably a bit about my personal life as a person. So not just as a mom, but I believe that coming here was not a mistake at all, meaning that there's a lot of blessings that comes, especially when you are where God wants you to be, because it's one thing to just want to do something and it's just you're doing it on your own. It's another thing when God really wants you to be where you are. So I would say the blessings of this land, one, I would say it's education. I struggled a lot when I was in college back home. And the way things were done was actually a bit different. You have the college professors, the way you're not sure exactly how it is now, but it was very, very difficult to one because of the type of they don't differentiate between the type of learners they have. Everybody's the same. They push you. They want you to do things in a certain way and things like that. And because of the way, at least here in the United States, the way the lectures are taught, the way you have the open access to your professors, which is not what we get in Nigeria. So it's such a big difference. It allowed me to want to pursue education, not just on the very first level, which will probably would have been what would have happened to me back in Nigeria. I would have probably pushed through my first level, which is my bachelor's, and be done with it, which was what I was doing, and just be done with it. How many years it took? I was in college for 4 years. I never graduated because strike and all of those things kept happening. In addition to the challenges of being in school, and I wasn't a bad student. It was just I learned a little differently than everybody else. So now coming here, it gave me, and I'm not gonna lie, it gave me the opportunity to go for the first time obtaining my bachelor's. I wanted more, my master's, because the background, the level, the way things are being, at least to students in my school, my college, and hey, University of Maryland, College Park, and all the other colleges I've been to, they helped me to grow at my own pace. So the classes I took, the open doors of professors, the assistants with tutors, and all of those things helped me obtain my bachelor's, my master's, my doctoral program, and all of the, and I'm still going. So the fact that they had this opportunity for education and to being the sky being the limit is really helped me. I think it's for me, that is one blessing. It's a good one. And the other part I mentioned was it's being a parent. Um, my children as well having this opportunity when it comes to education and being able to, and there's a whole lot of different things to that, but I would just say the fact that you have education, you have scholarships and all those other things that can help our choices. And back home, when I was growing up, you were only allowed to do three things. You have to be an engineer, a lawyer, or a medical doctor. Those are
Absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
that you're allowed to be. Anything outside of that, you're just not, you're not allowed to be. But that, I guess, the opportunity that's now available to the children, while they can actually be what they really want to be and they follow their passion, is definitely a big one as well. Big blessing. So yeah.
Absolutely. So interesting, the thing you said about school, because yeah, I did my first degree in Nigeria as well. And at that time, I don't think I had any colleague in class who was working, or who was working a formal job.
From a job.
But you actually have the opportunity to go to school here and you can be working. You can take one class in a semester if that's all you wanted to do. You can take two classes in a semester. You can actually pace yourself to do the
Right.
work. But then we were all of us were students. If there was anybody working, maybe people were selling stuff, but not like office work and going
Office
to
work.
school. So it's really very interesting that you highlight that and the resources. And for that professor accessibility, oh my goodness. I don't know if you have those things where you had to buy those handouts.
You
How
will
much
buy
did
them.
it cost?
And then they'll use, and I'm sorry, I don't know if this happened to anyone. You actually use a little money that you have that you're supposed to spend on yourself to buy these handouts because they steal it from you, and it's a whole thing's going on. You're struggling with the class, you buy the handouts, and it's stolen, and your parents, at least my father, is not going to give you another. They're not going to give you any, so you have to find a way to not pay for it. And it's so much. I mean, and then of course competition and a lot of all those there. So yeah, a lot of stuff
Yeah,
out there.
but I've taught classes in university here, and it's hassled me like, oh no, that book is too expensive because you have to put your book on reserve and put it in the library and student, and they're like, no, that book is too expensive. Can you find a book that's less expensive? We're not going to have you recommend. I'm like, so there's that consideration. It can't just be what I want. There's somebody looking over my shoulders and making sure that I'm not making things too difficult for the student. So it's really very interesting that you point that out. As much as we love all of those things, I wanted to ask you about the beauty of the homeland. Say something about home. I know you talked a little bit about having all of these people wait on you, but say some other thing about the homeland that you miss, and you're like, why can't the Americans just incorporate this into their country? Anything comes to mind?
All right. So as far as what I missed, and I think I touched a little bit on it, it's the fact that number one, now, of course, it's been decades, so definitely it's a little different. But number one, family, because the help, you said it, that I thought I probably would have had if I was home when I had my first child. The joy of having this family that comes to you, you don't have to ask them. They just come, they support you. The things that you probably just don't have to, you don't even have to think about a thing. I mean, you're there as a mom, all you get to do is just take care of the child, and everybody else does everything else for you. So absolutely, that's great. And I think there's one thing about our culture. We have a community where, and I know you've heard this, a community raises a child. I really miss that. I really do miss that. I was telling my children, of course, they have a different perspective growing up around here, that when that word is was not, it's maybe it's a word or maybe it's a proverb or whatever it came from. It's not just Annie, it's just it wasn't just sad just because someone wants to say it. It's a real thing that happens in Africa. If you do anything wrong and a neighbor sees you, they're going to put you in check. If you're in school and you do anything wrong, your teachers will do the due diligence, make sure. And if they decide to report you to your parents, you're in
Oh
trouble.
my goodness, yes.
So it doesn't matter where you are. You can be in church, you can be outside playing. You better be in your best behavior. It's not something you're not going to get away with you just doing anything and anyhow. So I told them that it's so interesting now that only parents get to raise a child here, of course, because the environment, the technology, and all that's just changed everything. So I do really miss that. Even though growing up, we hated the idea that I don't even know you. You're trying to tell me what to do. But then I told them that really shaped us. It helped us. There's some things we probably would have done and been in this environment, gotten away with, and probably would have thought it was the right thing. But because we're put in check, it helped us to actually grow, become a better person. So that was a big, big factor for me, not having that checks and balances, at least with the children, when it comes to probably outsiders helping with children as well. And you know how it is in this environment. So, and in addition to that, just a third perspective to that is just having, as long as you are, of course, as long as you have your cash, as just having every help you have someone to drive you around. It's a comfort of just being able to have a staff and to do pretty much everything outside of you doing your professional work. Everything else, someone is there to cook, to do your laundry, like you were saying. When you had your child, that you were the cook, you were the nanny, you were the driver, you were also the what, everything. Just back home, it was just a norm, or maybe I would say at least to some extent, to at least have, even if it's a family member that comes to stay with you, or you actually had to just hire someone to do that for you, at least that part of your life it's taken care of, meaning that you don't have to stress over that. So I'm coming home, you're trying to cook lunch or dinner. If you have children, or if you are trying after a whole day's work, talking about here being, and I said, but back home, you come home after being stressed all day, at least someone to cook, someone to do the cleaning, house cleaning for you, a driver to bring you back home. So that aspect of your life is taken care of while you focus on other things. I can say more, but let me just stop there.
I know, it's so interesting. And I wrote something down when you were saying, you said, you don't have to ask them. It's very interesting. I saw someone put out a list because it's summer's around the corner. They're going to be having cookout. And somebody said, if you are not invited directly by the person hosting it, don't go. It's like, that's not, but it's like, we don't have to, we came from where you don't have to ask people to do things,
Okay.
and you don't have to be invited. It's just this overflowing love that just flows out and flows out for anybody. And I definitely do miss like the or being on your best behavior, not just because your parents are around, but because everybody's looking at you, and your parents are going to find out one way or the other whether they're there or not. So it's in your best interest to be on your best behavior at all times because you're representing them. Awesome, awesome. Well, out here in the diaspora, we are people look sometimes and say, oh, but people should remain where they are. But the world is really benefiting from all this integration that we're saying. What are some of the benefits that you can say of this integration? What are you doing, and how are you making some changes in your space that you can say, it's something that you're bringing to the table, as it were?
All right. So, if I understand correctly, pretty much at this day, at least this time, you probably just wanted me to speak a bit of whatever about what I'm doing. All right. So, in a couple of years, I believe it was at work. And it was, and like I said, there's a lot of things that you can see, like from different perspective, being here in diaspora, and of course, benefits of being home. But one of the things that I've come to realize that I never did when I was back home was the fact that you have to find a way to resolve, not complain. And it's part of, I guess, maybe it's just me growing up. There's a lot of complaints that going back with nobody bringing solution to the table. Complain about the government and politics and leaders and what they're doing in church. And, complaints, complaints, complaints. But think of this culture in this part of the world that tells you and challenges you. When you see a problem, find a way to be a solution. And I thank God, and that was what the mindset I had years and years ago when I was working with a company here in Maryland, actually in Baltimore, where we had very little, very just minimal number of minorities. And because the company has been out there for so long and permit me to use the word Caucasians, I guess. So it was dominated with that. So we have minority probably when it comes to Black people, maybe you can say, I'm not going to exaggerate, maybe 5%. So you don't see them in like supervisor position, managerial position as much. Right, probably one or two you see here and there. And unfortunately, those people tend not to want to help because they don't want to put themselves in a position where they will be fired as well. Like, oh, so what are you trying to do? Because you gave you this opportunity. So that was a challenge back then. And being a young engineer, I realized that a lot of us, we're really trying hard to be promoted. We're trying not to fit in. We're trying so hard just to be something. And one of the things we came up with, a friend called said, well, you know what? I have a mentor. And the mentor would like to meet after hours, just happy hour and just to talk and see. And there was the mentor actually he transitioned from a different company, so was able to get a higher position because it was already in a higher position where he came from. So he was probably at the time maybe a second level supervisor or whatever, but it was much higher than, at least his position was a bit higher than every one of us at least at the time. When I say every one of us, I was talking about Africans. So not African Americans, but Africans. So very handful of us, very few of us. But what I really want to bring out with that is when she told me that I started to think about, okay, so we have a few of us and we're growing. And whenever we get to see each other, we have one thing or the other to say about the supervisor. They're not giving us this. They're not giving us the opportunity to do this. You wanted to do this. And that was a complaint over and over again. So I'm like, you know what? All right, so let's not just meet to drink and have happy hour. Let's find a way to actually see if we can break through these issues and problems that we've been having. You have the same complaint. I have the same complaint. Everybody else go coming up with this. So how do we become a solution just to make sure that people that are coming behind, even if we don't benefit from it, they'll benefit from it? And so we started, like we called it at the time that call it Nigerians in Excellent. That's what we called it, or Nigerians at the time. So what we did was we'll gather together, and thankfully we had one person that was in the managerial position at the time. So we started to find a way to mentor each other. So when we gather, we don't just gather. Well, like, what problems are you having? Oh yeah, my supervisor told me that I can't go for a leadership training because I don't fit that. So that guy will take that and say, you know what, why don't you go through this route, apply to this, and go this direction? You'll be able to get what you need. So within ourselves, we started to find strategies that will allow us to grow. Some of us, and we're not people who are well educated. It's not that they're not educated for their position, but for some odd reason, we're just being literally pushed down. People were not getting breakthroughs. So with that opportunity, we were able to navigate. People were now starting to get promotion. We came together, we find strategies, we find ways to actually help each other to become better, not only on our jobs, but also to be able to rise higher. And what became of that, we grew so big in the organization. And when I left, actually, that was why I started DANUP. DANUP is Diaspora African Network of Powerful Professionals. We are powerful professionals. How can we network? How can we brush at least iron sharpened iron? How can you sharpen each other? You may be the best in your field, and I might be the best in my field, but then we don't have to be isolated. We can benefit. You being a medical doctor, me being an engineer, there's something you don't know. So how can we come together and make sure that we impact each other positively. And it really, and up until today, every now, all the engineers, at least I would say Africans, maybe I'm just being, I don't know, Pasha or whatever, that steps into that community, they step into a community that can help them. It was a soft ground for them to land on because we already have an existing environment where they can feel comfortable, come with their problems, and be able and be rest assured that they can actually get help for their problems to be resolved. One more thing, Dr. Lillian, I'm sorry. There was a lady, of course, I won't mention names, that she came on board as an intern, but she was at the time, I think she was in her trying to get a doctorate degree at the time. So she came as an intern, but she was on a work visa. You know how students come in. So at the end, she was already probably at the end of her program in college, or maybe she completed it, whatever. And it was also the end of her internship. So she was bound to be returned back to Nigeria. And I kid you not, Dr. Linia, this is no joke. On a Friday, HR was telling her your work is terminated. And that literally means yes. Yes, that literally means that's done. Now she's back the road and she goes, and she's been around at least for a decade because she's been bachelor's and master's and all of. You can imagine the pain. All she had to do was call one of at the time, the gentleman that I was talking to you about was actually at the time, I think he was pretty much close like to the vice president at the time because the guy was really good when it came to networking and getting us hooked up. He called, you know what, this is what HR told me. I don't know what to do. And did she cried? She was crying on the phone. And the guy said, you know what, don't worry. He called the president of the company, called the CEO, called HR, called X. The guy was just called throughout the weekend. By Monday, they reinstated her. That is a power connection. It's a power of being able to come together as a community, help each other, resolve our problems. So that was a powerful testimony to me that yes, we can help each other. Yes, we can become solutions to regardless of how little it is, we can actually bring solutions to problems. And that's just one thing I wanted to mention. Thank you. You're on mute. I can hear you.
Awesome. That's so great. I do want to point out when you said, medical doctor, I'm like the lady, I have a doctorate in public health, not a medical doctor. I wanted to point out, but I said so many great things you said, about coming together and working together. And I can imagine when I came as a doctoral student myself, my I-20 was for 10 years. So yes, you can get that 10 years to stay. But after the 10 years, you don't just want to pick up your bag and go. You can go back home if that's what you want to do.
Want
But
to
if you're
do,
looking
yeah.
to do stay and work, I'm glad she got to stay and work. Talking about here and home also, I wanted to quickly ask you, how connected are you so you obviously are connected to the Nigerian community here. How do you stay connected with home, with what's going on at home? Does that bother you in any way? Are you thinking at some point in time that, retiring and going back home is going to be a thing? Oh, where do you sit on that spectrum?
Oh my God, why do you have to ask that question? Come on now.
I mean, I get different answers, but I want to know, it's like, that's why I said it's a spectrum. The people on that spectrum, like, no, it's not happening. Thank you very much. This is now, and they're like, oh, it depends, let the Lord lead me, and then it's like, oh, the things to do at home. Yes, we're going to change it. But where do you fit in that spectrum?
My goodness. So I will say, if you've asked me the same question about 15 years ago, or maybe 10 before my dad passed, I definitely would have told you, yes, I'll probably consider a vacation back home and, after retiring, having just go, come back and all that. But after my dad passed, a lot of things happened. And I don't know, I have a huge family. I'm from a polygamous home. So a lot of people that you thought were your friends, you kind of see that they're not quite your friends anymore. So when you go, you don't want to go into an environment where it's hostile. So for me, going back home, and even though a lot of people will probably think otherwise, it's like going into a hostile environment because it's like, oh, so you're coming back to take over from us. So where were you all these years? And all those other things. And I'm not interested in anything my dad had or whatever. I just want to live my life. But that's not the same way when you actually just show up. It's like, oh, okay, you're coming to take control now. So that's definitely a big part of me not wanting to go home, as far as probably considering home as a retirement place for me, home being Nigeria. A second part to that is my husband is pretty much spent his at least youthful years and all that here. So he's acclimated to this environment more than anything else. So as far as friends is concerned and all that, maybe family members that he gets probably connect with, that's about all he has at home. So it doesn't really, it's not, as far as it's concerned, home is not a place for him to retire because there's nothing there to go meet or see or do. Right. When you talk about my family, as far as my dad is concerned, he has a very big base and all that at home, unfortunately, because most of his children are out here and abroad. It's as if family members. So it would have been a good idea if we can actually have someone to kind of take care of that territory and all that. But unfortunately, it's not something I'm really probably interested in. Why did I say that? People will say, so now you now leave your daddy's like father's legacy. You know how it is. Your father's legacy, actually, my father's younger sister is still here. So, you guys cannot just stay here and forget your father. Your father built this legacy and you have to take it. Yes, absolutely great. But we have our own lives to lead. But just to answer your questions, my factors, my pros, as far as the things that would not probably, that doesn't tend to agree with me going back home, there are much more that those things that probably might make me consider going back home. I've told you, one, just going back to an environment where people just think you're now, trying to become their boss or take things away from them. Two, my husband does not have, as far as probably any close friends, relationship, whatever, back in Nigeria. So retiring at home, it's definitely going to be not too good for him because you want to have a community where you can have friends and still communicate, and when you get older. And finally, I would probably just say, as far as that is concerned, a home is home. Not gonna lie to you, but then who is going to take care of you? Your children. They're here, and I do not see them. I may be wrong. I don't see them saying, you know what, because my parents are home, now I'm going to be, and you do need that support when you get to that point. And that's what we're working with when my husband's parents now, they're trying to figure things out. And I'm not going to say much about that in terms of their parents here and back in Nigeria. So yes, who's going to take care of you? You have to be very, very, very clear on that. Because when it gets to old age, is there a nursing home you want to go to in Nigeria and without the children? So yes, a lot of things to consider. So for me, I would say definitely here is more of a retirement place for me. Visiting home, absolutely, why not? But that's my best answer for now.
Absolutely. So interesting, Engineer Tina. It's been wonderful talking to you, getting to know, wanting to be an engineer like your dad, going that route, but suddenly Prince Charming coming and, bringing a spin on things so that America becomes home, coming to America and saying, wait a minute, I have to work this hard. I have to pay all those bills. I have to go out, rain, sunshine, snow, and the whole nine yards. But really, looking at the difference in their culture in terms of respect and deference for those in authority, working through that, excelling in your field and saying, it's okay for me to be doing well, but whether people who have abilities and are struggling, how do we mentor them? Coming up with the organization, working with powerful professionals, make sure that they are on track. And then thinking about home, yeah, that's an option if certain things were not in place and if certain things were in place. So several factors are weigh in that consideration. I've enjoyed this conversation, and as we're
Thank you.
up, I wanted to give you an opportunity. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we didn't get around to talk about yet?
Actually, we pretty much touched on everything, but also I also want to say that one thing in life is that we have to always be very aware of is wherever you find yourself, you have to make the best use of the opportunity that you have. So it's one thing to find yourself probably in the diaspora and not make use of the opportunity and you just want to be like the Joneses down the street. And that's one thing I've seen. And I'm not going to lie to you. I fell into that. I was in a community in a church where they want to buy a car and someone wants to get better. Someone wants to buy a better car than that. And all this going on, you can easily get carried away. I'm not saying we shouldn't probably enjoy the social aspect of it, but we have to come to the realization that you don't always have to want to struggle to be like somebody else. We need to get to a point where we want to be who God has created us to be. And you being here, you doing what you're doing or whatever you are at any point in time, You always have to evaluate your situation and say to yourself, Tinah, are you doing what God wants you to be doing at this point in time where you are? Are you making the best use of the opportunity? Or am I running after someone else's dream? And that's what I've seen. I've learned from that. People buying houses and bigger houses and did this and that, and then they spend their entire life working, and some people die in the process of trying to be like the Joneses down the street. So I just believe, like for us as the aspirants, or just maybe everybody else, that wherever we are, we always have to ask ourselves, yes, you have this opportunity. Yes, I'm where probably maybe not, maybe you are where you want to be or not, or whatever it is, and then not comparing yourself to other people, but are you following your dream, your purpose, your goal, what God has called you to do? Because becoming a better version of yourself is what is required of you, not becoming like the Joneses down the street. It's a better version of yourself, and that's what's required of you. And of course, be a blessing to others. That's the word I just want to pass out there to people out there.
Awesome. That's an awesome way to close out. So, charge to you. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for enjoying this conversation. But Engineer Tinah is giving you a charge. Don't let the Joneses be your measuring stick. For her, it's looking at God and saying what God wants me to do. If you don't believe in God, as it, look for something and say, how do you be the better version of you? The Joneses are not necessarily the better version of you. How are you committed to yourself and to your growth and to make a difference? You have been listening to the Diaspora Dialogue series with LA. My guest today has been Engineer Tinah Ibironke. She joined me from Maryland, and I'm going to come your way again soon. Another guest having these conversations and unfolding different stories about life in the diaspora. Tinah, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And
Appreciate
until
it.
I come away some other time, so long and take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.